What a pleasure to be here today and to see such curious faces in the audience. We do have a treat for you, as Nick already alluded to. We are in the presence of royalty. Um, so Jay Alammar is a Director and Engineering Fellow at Cohere and best-selling author, co-author. We'll talk about this. For hands-on large language models, it is a fantastic textbook that I have had the pleasure of reading and learning from myself. Jay has helped millions of learners around the world understand complex AI concepts, like large language models, and through his writing and online courses. These are even taught at top universities, such as Stanford and MIT. So some of the best minds are learning from Jay. Okay, so at Cohere, he's part of the research teams, and he's building the next generation of AI models. Please welcome Jay.
Thank you, thank you.
So Jay, what did I miss?
That was a great, very kind introduction. One project we're currently working on is an upcoming book called An Illustrated Guide to AI Agents, where we sort of see the next and explain visually in an accessible manner sort of where we see the next step in the evolution of AI and large language models. So that's the focus for the next few months for me.
Amazing. Okay, so we will go into that in a second, but what I'd like you to perhaps give us an idea and a sense of is your own trajectory into AI. So you've been a software engineer, an investor, you've been working with these AI models for a while. Can you give us a sense, and it doesn't have to be your full bio, but I think what the audience might be really interested in, like, what were you seeing along the way that kept you on this trajectory?
That's a great question. I've always been fascinated with technology and then how technology interacts with the economy. I have a few gray hairs, and so I've seen a few of the previous shifts where technology opens up new avenues for the economy. And we can point at a few of these. So the rise of the personal computer was one. That changes jobs, economies, companies. You start to have companies like Microsoft and Apple. Then a decade or two later, you start to have the internet, and then that opens up new, it like changes the formula of where the value is, and you start to see companies like Amazon, like eBay, like Yahoo, Google, and others. And then a decade or two later, you start to see smartphones and people having internet on their phones, and then you start to see this, again, new shift where there are new winners and sort of people that have to adapt to it. You start to see companies like, I don't know, Uber and all other kinds of smartphones sort of enabled. And so AI seemed to be this most recent sort of shift that could be as dramatic as these. But I also have thought of it as dramatic as earlier shifts in technology that changed so much in the past. And I think specifically about two. So just the invention of writing, for example, as a technology shift. That is literally what we call the beginning of history, which is when humans started writing down things. And that's a shift in language technology. And a lot of this AI developments came from a language technology called a language model. Another language technology that changed things dramatically was the printing press. Prior to that, if you needed a copy of a book, you needed to go and copy it yourself or pay somebody to actually go and copy it by hand. But then we had that, and literacy and sort of the knowledge revolution sort of. So I've been speculating, about 5 years later, that could language models have as big an impact on us as a species as much as the writing did or the printing press did? And more and more it seems evident that it will be. And the main thing that sort of attracted me, at least to focus on it this closely for the last 5 years, is language models started to become around 2000, 2001, we started to have these GPT-2 and GPT-3 models, where it was for the first time in the history of humanity, we had a machine, an object that was able to write an article that we couldn't tell, did a human write this or did a machine write this? And to me, this was shocking. And like trying to see the potential of where this would go in the future was absolutely incredible. And that continued to be validated. Like 2 years later, things like ChatGPT came out, and that became sort of a lot more public, and we start to see sort of that evolution year by year, month by month now.
Fascinating. So I guess the next question would then be around how are these large language models actually changing industry? So for example, the utilities industry, just to give you an example, is about 60% text-based, right? So a lot of the work and the tasks that go in on a day-to-day basis is text-based. So right now we're talking about large language models. How are you seeing this technology change, disrupt, evolve industries?
So one useful way or lens to look at this is software has always been sort of pushing the art of what's possible. And every company has to become a software company eventually. Like 30 years ago, there were 2 companies that are public in the top 20 companies in the US stock market. There were, I think, Microsoft and Intel. Now, internet companies or technology or software companies dominate, but also every other company there has a massive software stack. And a useful lens is to think of AI as just the next version of software, as software 2.0 or 3.0, where software is now able to do more complex things that it wasn't able to do in the past. And a lot of these are around text, as you mentioned. It's also around the other, what we call modalities or type of data, of audio, of images, of video, its ability to understand, quote unquote, understand, that's a loaded term, but to have some understanding of images and text, but then also generate and solve problems and do some knowledge work with building pipelines of these sort of various capabilities. For language models specifically, my advice generally to people is to think about them as a toolbox, not as a digital brain. For people to think of them as a toolbox of multiple abilities that you can string around and add to your systems to make things, let's say, to build more complex systems. And so with a language model, these can be translation is one. So you have a data pipeline where there's a translation task, or where there's a translation that would have been done easier. A language model is reliable for that right now. They weren't 3 years ago, they are now. Summarization is another one. So if you're in an organization that has massive amounts of lots of documents, and summaries are something that models do very well. Answering questions about documents, about articles, extraction. So if you have an article, you can say, okay, extract the names of the companies or the names of the people here. So thinking of these as just individual knowledge work building blocks and then building systems using those is one, let's say, AI literacy skill set that is useful for the people sort of building and shaping and trying to understand how these tools can work in their sort of their innovation of how work is going to be done in the future, I would say.
So you mentioned data in there. You talked about the algorithms and software, AI being the evolution of software. But one of the defining factors of AI and distinguishing factors is the role that data plays in the models, right? It's not deterministic, it's probabilistic. Can you help us, for those in the audience not as familiar with the technical bits and bobs, to help understand what does that mean? And what does it mean for our personal data to be interacting with these algorithms as well?
Yeah, that's an incredible point. So 2 things, like there's one big shift. I think there are two points that I'd love to sort of add there. So one is, yes, AI, deep learning, and language models currently, this current sort of paradigm that we're living that is enabling all of this change, is reliant on data. And to give an example, if you have the systems that we're doing, let's say, voice to text transcription from 15 years ago, these systems were about 500,000 lines of code. There was so much code because linguists and computer scientists need to sort of write down every sort of single thing that is to be able to analyze sound and sort of turn it into text. With all of the work in the University of Toronto on neural networks and sort of Geoffrey Hinton's lab and all of that work, deep neural networks change that paradigm. So now the code is only maybe 200 lines of code, but you have a massive mountain of data that these 200 lines of code can build a system that finds all of these patterns in the data, where in language we needed, in the past, these language systems used to be, you need to write down the exact grammars into the systems. You no longer need that. Just give a very strong or capable language model, vast amount of data, and it will find these patterns if you give it, let's say, clean, high-quality data. So that's one nature of this shift. And then another nature in this shift from software to this new generation of AI software is exactly what you mentioned. So where the models are probabilistic and not deterministic. Deterministic is to say, there are some systems that each time you give them the same input, they will give you the exact same output. And we rely on software a lot for a lot of these use cases. Every traffic light is a software system that is reliable, and we trust it with our lives every day, for example. Language models or AI systems can have a certain sense of randomness. That is, it can be tweaked with a knob. But not necessarily every input will give you the same output. So that's a part of understanding these systems, that there is this sense of randomness that is useful to solve and sort of problem solve around. Because if you give two people one article to summarize, they will give you different summaries. So this is a useful part of doing this. And so to do that, there's these ways of, prompt engineering, for example, where we give the model more instructions about what we would like to see in that flow. So as people try to build systems or companies or involve these models into their flows and sort of elevate their own skill set and the things that they sort of do with these. One concept that is important is to know that there is going to be a little bit of variance every time sort of the model, and you can make that work for you depending on what you sort of want out of this model, either in productivity use cases or creativity use cases, which need a lot of that randomness and can use it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so today's summit's going to touch upon, some of these pieces, and I find this fascinating around the creativity aspects and then harnessing these language models for the productivity aspects. So a few things that you just said, right? Large language models digest vast amounts of data, pick out the patterns from it, and so there is a distinction between high resource languages, where there's a lot of data patterns for it, and low resource languages, right? This is one area of responsible AI is, both debiasing the models, but also making models accessible to languages that don't have a digital footprints, like the dominant languages, English, French, et cetera. I know at Cohere, you have Cohere for All. Did you want to just talk a little bit about that initiative?
Incredible, yes.
Yeah.
So the Cohere, the company, focuses on multilinguality, so supporting multiple languages. And that is important for enterprises that we sort of focus on. If you're a company in Canada, you need to support multiple languages beyond just English, for example. And then Cohere supports a lab called Cohere Labs. And that is an open research lab that aims to make everybody, let's say, expand the roads into ML research. And so in that research lab that is mostly online, thousands of collaborators come together to create data sets and language models and vision language models that support vast amounts of languages. And so some of the most recent models we call AYA models, AYA, about 3,000 people from all around the world came together, which included them labeling and collecting data from hundreds of languages to be able to sort of source them in and give the models more ability to understand and maybe translate between all of these various languages and empower the people that speak in these languages. So with language, it's a fascinating thing to see where AI is taking language and how that sort of will impact society. We've had the Google Lens or the instant translation via camera for a while. Now we're starting to see the audio that sort of instantly sort of translate that. But we're really excited to create these models and publish them as open source so everybody can use them to build the next thing themselves. So I do think there's an incredible thing there in the open research and open collaboration of publishing data sets and publishing models and sort of collaborating with the global research and, let's say, technology communities in that way.
So it is fascinating, like the innovations that are coming about and that are possible, right? Like we're talking about translation, the ability to communicate across barriers, to be more connected. We'll talk about the dark side of that too. I don't want to sell everything wholesale because it's all real talk here. But I'm sitting in the audience. I'm a young person today. What do I do with, like, the world is full of new possibilities that haven't been exhausted, right? Like there are new ways of working. There's new ways of framing problems or solving problems, or where do I get started?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I try to solve it personally on maybe 3 levels, or attacking it at 3 levels. So one on just career and finding out how that changes the career that I'm working in, and so that's why I switched from software to AI, just to see firsthand how this goes into the economy and how this sort of changes and evolves. Outside of my research, there's a lot of, I try to, or I have to spend a lot of my time just learning how can I improve my day-to-day workflows using whatever tools that are out there. And so how to sort of disrupt my own job and workflow so I can sort of be more productive and sort of grow in the areas that I would like to. So trying out the new apps that come out, and so that's an important, and finding sort of the right workflows, seeing what have worked for other people, what has not. So that's another thing that is sort of also sort of important to do. And then like a third one that is also maybe less practical is I try to think about the future of humanity as this sort of goes, and it just comes from my interest in like science fiction and like speculative fiction, and so for that I both would be in the reference library reading about both sci-fi but also a little bit of philosophy as well, because in today's world, we have to think about a lot of things like what is personhood, what is truth, and these all sort of come together. And looking at the past is a very useful thing to see, what some of the best minds have said about these things. So these are 3 tracks that I sort of personally tackle. But then these technologies, you need to think about them from an individual level, from a company level, from a community level, maybe even on an economy level. There are decisions that need to be made and adaptations that need to be made across all of these sort of levels. And they certainly, as you mentioned, it's true talk, so they certainly create new opportunities, but they will create new challenges as well across all of these. And so the sooner somebody adapts to them and sort of grows with them and incorporates them, the more they'll be sort of using them to empower themselves and their various circles, community, company, country, economy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it does speak to the value of spaces like the Toronto Public Library, right? Like these are information repositories, so they're already playing a role in literacy, with the Google funds and how they're educating the general public. It also is a real opportunity for them to redefine keepers of knowledge and information in an AI era. And then there's this role of having, you mentioned earlier, open education, open access, open models. What is the role that both libraries can play in this area, but also, the resources that you are making available educationally? Like, how do I approach these spaces as, I don't have to be a young person, but like if I'm trying to learn a little bit more about AI or thinking about my career pivots, how am I approaching these spaces?
So libraries are certainly an important place for education, but also for the evolution of how this how this changes society and how citizens work with local communities and sort of even broader communities, and all of that still needs to be sort of there's a lot of innovation that needs to be done to utilize a lot of these. We're still in the beginning. Like, if there's no more development in how capable the models are, the diffusion of this tech into the various sort of institutions and companies and industries will can last another 10 years of just today's technology if we stop that. So there still needs to be quite a bit of libraries help a lot with certainly access, with events, with education. I tend to even go to a lot of these local meetups, technology meetups. Some of them are hosted in the library, and those are useful just to see what works for other people. But mostly it's like I advise people to follow your curiosities. Find what aspects about this new wave make you more curious, and just pull on that thread. And that's the best way to sort of propel you forward. And that can be either, productivity or creativity use cases. And if there's any child in the audience today, now they have tools in their hand that make them more capable than Walt Disney was 80 years ago, just through a couple of $100 of subscriptions. And so yes, there are challenges, but there are opportunities. And so the best way is to learn from other people. And a lot of it is in person as well. So I love virtual events, but I love that libraries actually bring people together, and you can get a lot of that community and that face-to-face sort of interaction and knowledge diffusion through libraries.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, right? Because there's an element of AI, but AI, like you said, is a toolbox. It's a technology. It's not, the change is still happening at a very human level. It's still humans making decisions to implement this technology in a certain way. Pardon me. There's still humans making decisions on how to govern these technologies. There's still humans making decisions and policies as to how this technology will be embedded in society as well. Let's take a couple of minutes and talk about that dark side, right? Because it's not just a young whippersnapper with like the tools, the AI tools. There are real, myself included, like we have jobs, and it's just constantly changing. Like every day there's a new model released. Every day there are 8 new models released, and I'm like, I don't know what, there's like this mental health element of it. Like it's just being shoved and shoved and shoved because there's just so much activity there. How do we make sense of the change? How do we maintain our sanity in trying, and not to say you're a psychologist or anything in that manner, but how do you contextualize that change, manage that change a bit better? And you had, earlier you spoke about, think about it from a career perspective, think about it from an experimentation perspective, and then think about it from an impact perspective. Is that a nice framework? Like, what do you think about the space of change, and how do we keep up with it?
Yeah, it is very fast and rapid, and I suffer from that as well. Like to be able to keep up with everything that happens in the field. So I keep a narrow sort of lens on things that I focus on, and sort of build systems of where ideas that filter through are things that, for example, I would follow maybe 1,000 high signal researchers on, let's say, LinkedIn or Twitter or Blue Sky or any other sort of social media. And then the things that I would focus on are the things that I see popping up over and over again, for example. So using people as a distributed computer to actually vote on ideas that should but also ignoring everything else and ignoring so much of sort of that is noise and not jumping necessarily on everything. There are, with time, you start to see a few ideas that have become central, and you need to sort of pay attention to them and adapt them into sort of your. One of the first ones is the idea. I think we touched on it a little bit when we talked about the probabilistic nature. So when ChatGPT first came out, people started using it as a search engine and asking it questions, and it will answer very confidently. And everybody in the AI research field was saying, don't trust these models on what they say. There is a problem called hallucinations. They will be very confidently wrong. And so when you're talking about factual information, that's not a language model answering from its own data that was trained on, that was a cutoff between 2 years ago, and it knows nothing before, let's say, 2022. There are now better systems that incorporate external data into that. There are systems that are called retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, for example. But the first thing to understand is this idea of hallucinations happen, and then you should verify, and you should use the answers of a model and double check them and ask it for its sources and go and actually. And if we're building systems or startups or companies, we need to empower the end user to be able to double check and say, the model said this, and these are the exact documents or even sentences of the sources of where that has happened. And we've seen, some people get in trouble for actually trusting a model, or putting data or documents into courts that were hallucinated. So hallucinations is one thing. Another major thing we're starting to see or we've seen for a while, is the challenge of things like deep fakes, and people sort of not being able to trust a lot of the media. Is it true? Is it not? Suddenly in just September of this year, I don't know if anybody's noticed this, but like on these short video platforms, I use YouTube Shorts or whatever, suddenly there's so many strange things happening. There's so many cats that are protecting babies from bears.
AI slop.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so the minute I am surprised about anything in any of these platforms, I see if the date is before September of 2025 or after. And and so we need the platforms and sort of regulation to catch up on that. So this is good if it's on Sora, but it's not good if you pretend that it's real and you diffuse it into the other sort of platforms.
Yeah.
So these are a couple of the adaptations that as a society we need to sort of build up. And these are just two examples of things like hallucinations and deepfakes that we need to understand and build around.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's, AI also interacting and changing humans, right? Like there's humans changing and building AI, and we've got other things, and we don't have time to go into it, but things like AI psychosis, these deep fakes. I was speaking to somebody at Interpol, and they were talking about how police forces around the world are expending resources chasing child sexual abuse material for children that don't exist, like trying to locate children that don't exist. So the world is changing quite a lot, and we're all still figuring this out as well. I'm going to ask one more question before we open it up to the audience. So think about all your questions. I'm giving you guys a heads up. So look, modern day AI, AI has a long history, but modern day AI, neural nets, ReLU, all of that came out of Toronto, our backyard, right? Dr. Jeffrey Hinton, who is just, I don't know, is there any prize he has not won? Like, I'm just waiting for him to win a Tony now and an Oscar at some point. He was at the University of Toronto. He has trained multiple generations of AI researchers, Nick being one of them. What is Canada's advantage now? I'm hearing we're slipping back, we're not, where are we? And where do we go from here? Like, how do we keep our little advantage in the world? Because we've got the talent, we've got people, what do we do?
True. Yeah, Canada has an incredible right to win in this, and there's incredible momentum that most other companies wish they had. And you mentioned a few of them. So yeah, Toronto, Dr. Hinton's team at UFT, and people who sort of picked up the mantle. But Vector Institute is another one. Mila, Amy up over in Alberta. There's so much, let's say, momentum of research, of attracting talent that has invested in AI when it was called the AI winter, when nobody was paying attention to deep learning, and CFAR and University of Toronto invested in that, and sort of that. There's a lot of talent coming out of Waterloo. I go to Silicon Valley, and every other person there is a Waterloo grad. So there's a big right to win. A lot of this technology came out of there. The T in GPT is for the transformer, which Aidan, our other co-founder, sort of was one of the people who built that at Google. And so it's just, it's got to be a constant sort of investment in how these, supporting these educational systems, the startup ecosystem, and sort of the company continue to attract the best talent and retain them. So hopefully the Waterloo grads start companies in Canada rather than sort of go to Silicon Valley and disrupt it there. So
Awesome.